80 years ago, this event took the world completely by surprise, started the atomic age, and almost literally wiped an entire city off the map. This was the famous atomic bombing of Hiroshima in Japan, an event that started the final phase, literally the last phase of World War II. And today we're going to learn minute by minute how it all happened. So stay tuned to find out with the War Room. I'm going to start by telling you about our Atom 2025 mission, which will mark the 80th anniversary of the Manhattan Project. We're leaving in October this year, starting at the Smithsonian Air and Space in Washington, where you'll be able to see the B-29 up close. Enola Gay, the main character in the events we're going to discuss here today, right? After that, I'll take you to New Mexico, where we're going to explore. Well, we already have a very comprehensive video, over 2 hours long, about this event here, detailing all its aspects. This is the famous Trinity test, or Trinity explosion, the first atomic explosion in history. This happened on July 16, 1945. And besides this event here, July 16, 1945 was also very important because it was the first day of the Potsdam Conference over in Germany, where President Harry Truman wanted to arrive with all the cards in his hand, and specifically to meet Stalin in person while having an atomic bomb. In addition, on July 16, there was also the loading in California, aboard the heavy cruiser United States ship Indianapolis, of the uranium-235 atomic bomb. The famous little boy, which would be dropped on Hiroshima. All these events happened simultaneously on July 16, 1945. Just 4 days after that, on July 20, 1945, the 509th Composite Group, the only atomic unit on the planet, which was already there in Tinian, in the Mariana Islands, began carrying out missions over Japan. These missions carried pumpkin bombs, or dummy bombs, with the same shape, weight, and all the same characteristics as the Little Boy and Fat Man bombs. 3 days after that, on July 23, the War Department sent President Truman the final list with the approved targets for the atomic bombings. So does the President approve these targets? And on July 25, the Army Chief of Staff gives the green light, approving the missions to be carried out. 1 day later, on July 26 in Potsdam, Germany, the conference between the three major leaders ends with the Potsdam Declaration. This declaration demands Japan's immediate and unconditional surrender, or else the country will face the consequences. Total obliteration. At no point is the term atomic bomb used, but the term total obliteration is precisely to make the Japanese fully aware that their future, if they do not surrender, would be very grim. That nothing new was presented by her, and on that same day, she leaves the United States aboard a C-54 airplane, the four-engine transport. One of these little boxes here, in this image, this box, the famous magnesium box, contains the two hemispheres of plutonium-239 that will form the warhead of the plutonium-239 from Nagasaki. On board that same plane are also 6 rings of enriched uranium, which will also make up the warhead of Little Boy, and a photo. So this one makes us stop and think about how such a tiny little box like this has the power to destroy an entire city. Physicist Harold Agnew, a member of the Manhattan Project and Project Alberta, is holding the little box. They are the scientists who went to the Pacific to assemble the atomic bombs there in the Marianas. And later he became the director of the Los Alamos Laboratory. This image in particular makes me think a lot about the power of big science, which is a type of science associated with the interests of the state. Created in the United States during World War II, 2 days later on July 31, 1945, Little Boy, the first of the 2 atomic bombs, was ready there in Tinian, already fully assembled, just waiting to be loaded onto the aircraft, since Japan had rejected the Potsdam Declaration. With the first atomic bomb already ready for launch, the mission already had the green light to go ahead. But the opposite happened. On August 1st, there was a weather emergency over Japan. A typhoon approached the country and ended up suspending all air operations around the Japanese archipelago for several days. So all the Americans in the Marianas could do was simply wait. And this photo here seems to show exactly that, right? 4 American soldiers sitting and waiting. Who are these 4 soldiers? Here, first you have Admiral Purnell. Here, the Pentagon representative with the atomic bombs, General Thomas Farrell, who was General Groves' deputy commander. In other words, he was the deputy military director of the Manhattan Project. Here is Colonel Paul Tibbets, commander of the 509th Composite Group, and here, the Navy captain, Dick Parsons, who had been the head of the Armaments Division of the Manhattan Project. And since he was the main representative responsible for creating the weapons that would carry the atomic warheads, Parsons decided to go aboard the first aircraft that would drop an atomic bomb, so that he himself could be the weaponeer or armorer of the first atomic device, to ensure nothing went wrong. The two will discuss with LeMay the final arrangements for the first atomic mission and Tibbets. Then he asks LeMay which of the cities on the target list will be attacked first, and LeMay confirms that it will be Hiroshima. LeMay then turns to Thomas Fairby, the bombardier of the first atomic mission, and asks him, in that city, what will be your target? What would be the landmark he would use to drop the bomb, Fairby? So he goes to a large map of Hiroshima that's pinned to the wall and puts his finger on a T-shaped bridge. Right in the center of the city, this is the Aioi Bridge. And upon seeing Fairby LeMay's choice then, there's immediate proof. On the morning of August 5th, the typhoon had already dissipated over the Japanese islands. Paul Tibbets then orders that aircraft number 82 from his composite group be named Enola Gay. This was a direct tribute to his mother, Enola Gay Tibbets, who was someone Paul Tibbets cared for deeply. His mother was the person who always encouraged him in his intention to become a pilot, right? She paid for his flight hours, so that's why he had this deep sense of gratitude toward his mother. But the person who didn't like any of this was the aircraft commander, Captain Robert Lewis, who was completely caught by surprise when he saw his aircraft emblazoned in huge letters with the name of the colonel's mother. In addition to renaming the aircraft, Paul Tibbets also made the decision to command it on that mission, since he was the commander of the group and didn't have his own aircraft. So, what Tibbets did was remove the original co-pilot from the crew, putting his commander, Robert Lewis, whom I mentioned to you here, in the position of co-pilot. Beside Tibbets and Lewis in this photo, here are also Dutch Van Kierk, the navigator of the Enola Gay, and also Thomas Fairby, the bombardier, the man who literally pressed the button that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The more I study the Manhattan Project and also the atomic bombings, the more I realize the number of careful steps the Americans took to carry out this kind of mission. Because everything there was really very new, and it was very difficult to figure out what could actually cause a catastrophic failure. So, a lot of thought was given to safety to reduce the severity of the damage that any kind of problem could cause. At midnight on August 6, 1945, Paul Tibbets then gathered his crews. Yes, crews, because the mission wasn't made up of just the Enola Gay. There were 3 other B-29 weather planes. Each of them was supposed to fly over one of the 3 cities designated as targets, with the first being Hiroshima, the second Kokura, and the third Nagasaki. And there were also 2 other B-planes that would fly along with the Enola Gay, one B-29 with scientific instruments and another with photographic cameras, and a 7th B-29 would also be part of the mission. This plane would be a backup for the atomic bomb plane, and it would stay parked on Iwo Jima Island, halfway to Japan. And it would only be used if the plane carrying the bomb, the Enola Gay, had any mechanical problems. At 1:37 in the morning, the three-weather B-29S, including the straight flush, which would fly over Hiroshima, the Jabot trace, which would fly over Kokura, and the full house, which would fly over Nagasaki, took off toward those cities to report the weather. A few minutes after that, at 1:51 in the morning, the B-29 Big Stink took off toward Iwo Jima. This is the plane I told you about, which would be the replacement for the Enola if any technical problem happened with the first plane. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Paul Tibbets and the Enola Gay crew take the last photo in front of the plane's fuselage. And a few minutes later, with everyone already in the cockpit, the plane's engines are started. The Enola Gay then heads to the north end of Tinian's runway. Then, at 2:45 in the morning that day, Paul Tibbets gives full power to the 4 engines, and the Enola Gay, heavily overloaded, will use the entire length of Tinian's north runway and take off right at the very end of it. 2 minutes after that, the great artist and necessary evil take off, the 2 planes that will accompany the Enola Gay at midnight. Dick Parsons pats Paul Tibbets on the shoulder and signals to him that he's going there. To the bomb bay, to start arming Little Boy, accompanied by electronics officer Maurice Jepson. Parsons then enters the bomb compartment and inserts the gunpowder and also the detonators into Little Boy. At this point, all components needed to trigger the atomic bomb are already inside it, and it only has the safety plugs inserted in it, preventing any accidental detonation. At 6 o'clock ante-meridium that day, flying at an altitude of 3,000 meters, which means there was no need for pressurization, the 3 B-29S flew over Iwo Jima Island A. So, the Big Stink, which is still on the runway, knows it won't need to act that day. At 7:15 in the morning, already much closer to Japan, Maurice Jepson goes back to the bomb bay and removes the safety plugs, inserting the arming plugs into the bombs. So from that moment, Little Boy was live and ready to use. 15 minutes later, at 7:30 a.m. Even closer now, Tibbets finally announces to the crew, over the radio, that they are carrying an atomic bomb. That shows the secrecy that still surrounded the operations. Inside the plane, only 4 or 5 men knew the true nature of the weapon. The rest were completely unaware. It is from that moment on that Tibbets also pressurizes the plane and climbs to 10,000 meters. And from that moment on, everyone puts their protective goggles on their foreheads and also puts on their flak jackets. At 0809 in the morning, the 3 weather planes begin to fly over the 3 target cities. And at 0824 in the morning, the plane that flew over Hiroshima. The straight flush radios the following message to the Enola Gay: clear weather. With only 3/10 cloud cover at any level, we recommend the primary target there, Enola Gay. Paul Tibbets confirms, we're going to Hiroshima. And then his radio operator sends a message to the unit's security officer, who's there in Iwo Jima, simply with the word primary. At 9:05 a.m., navigator Dutch Van Kirk tells the crew there are 10 minutes until the target. Then, looking out through the glass nose of the Enola Gay, the crew sees Hiroshima for the first time there on the horizon. At that moment, they are flying at 9,440 meters of altitude at 320 kilometers per hour, and they see the city with complete clarity without any kind of visual obstruction in their path. Below, the city's residents go about their lives on a typical morning. The male students are working in the armaments industry, and the female students are helping to demolish some houses, to open the famous fire breaks that help contain the fires from incendiary bombings that Japan has been constantly suffering. At 12 a.m., Paul Tibbets hands over control of the aircraft to his bombardier, Thomas Fairby. Fairby then takes command of the aircraft, piloting it through the Norden bomb site. By the way, it's a rather complex device, and if you want to know more about it in detail, watch our video here about the bomber mafia. Well, after you finish this one, while everyone is putting on their goggles, Fairby is keeping his eye glued to the Norden bomb site, and through it, he sees the T-shaped bridge appear before him, the I-Oi Bridge. From that moment on, he presses the button that starts the 60-second countdown for the automatic release of the atomic bomb. It's important for me to point out that all the times I'm using are in Mariana Islands time, and the local time in Hiroshima Japanese time was 1 hour earlier. We're talking about 8 hours, 14 minutes, and 17 seconds that morning. And even though the timer was set for 60 seconds, the atomic bomb was dropped at 9 hours, 15 minutes, and 15 seconds that morning. With that weight gone, the Enola Gay instantly rises 10 meters in the air. Fairby can still see the bomb shaking a lot in the air before it stabilizes and descends in a very straight trajectory. Immediately, Paul Tibbets makes a very sharp turn, 155 degrees down and to the right, taking the Enola Gay away from the city and moving it away from the target. The bomb continues on its downward trajectory until 44 seconds later, it reaches an altitude of 600 meters above the ground, and automatically, its device is triggered, resulting in the detonation at 9 hours, 16 minutes, and 2 seconds that morning. Then, the little boy detonates above Hiroshima. The detonation occurred above a medical clinic, just 200 meters from the original target, and instantly caused the eruption of a light many times brighter than the sun itself. The neutron and gamma radiation affected everything around it, including, of course, living beings, and was largely responsible for the health damage suffered by thousands of people decades after the event. The light and the approximately 260,000 degrees Celsius in the first fraction of a second after the detonation were responsible for vaporizing, literally turning all the people into vapor. In the immediate area of the explosion, resulting in shadows on the ground, which can still be seen even today. This intense light was followed by the immense fireball that consumed the entire center of Hiroshima. And about 1 second after the detonation, this fireball reached its maximum diameter of 274 meters. The shock wave resulting from the explosion reached 11,500 km/h, sweeping all of Hiroshima off the face of the earth. Right after reaching its maximum size, the fireball begins to contract and the temperature drops to 2,177 degrees Celsius. And it is precisely at this moment that the famous mushroom cloud begins to form. Instruments for measuring atmospheric pressure that were dropped from the scientific instrumentation B-29 recorded that the explosion over Hiroshima was equivalent to 15 kilotons. Already 18 kilometers from the target, Enola Gay is hit by 3 shock waves in sequence, which shake the entire aircraft, but do not cause major damage to its structure. Paul Tibbets later reported that, while the plane was being hit by the shock waves, he felt a strange taste in his mouth, a metallic taste like when you touch your tongue to a metal spoon. And at that moment, the only crew member who was facing the explosion was Bob Caron, the tail gunner of the Enola. Gay was the only man on the plane who saw both the detonation and the mushroom cloud forming. Then, when things settled down, Paul Tibbets made another half-turn with the aircraft and circled Hiroshima 3 times to assess the damage from the explosion. At the end of the 3rd circle, he then set the plane on course for the Marianas, and only when they were already 600 kilometers from Hiroshima. That's when Bob Caron, sitting back at the tail gunner's position, said he could no longer see the mushroom cloud. At 10:55 in the morning, the Americans intercepted a Japanese message coming from the Hiroshima region, saying that the Americans had tested a new type of weapon on the city. They didn't know its nature, but it could be magnesium, due to the very intense brightness that resulted from the explosion. And at 11 in the morning, another message, this time from the Ministry of the Army. It said that the Americans had tested the new weapon, which they had already been expecting to be tested, but they were never clear about the nature of this weapon. And at 2:58 p.m., On that afternoon of August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay landed back on the island of Tinian in the Mariana Islands after 12 hours and 13 minutes of flight. Paul Tibbets and his crew were received by the commander of the 20th Air Force, General Curtis LeMay, and also by the commander of the Pacific Air Forces, General Carl Spaatz. Paul Tibbets received the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest United States honor for combat bravery. As soon as he got off the aircraft, the Hiroshima mission had gone exactly as planned. Nothing went off Tibbets's plan, and the weapon worked just as it should, but the Japanese response remained complete silence. No expected surrender request was made. So, once again, a green light was given for a second atomic mission, which would now be carried out 3 days later. Unlike the first exemplary mission, the bombing of Nagasaki faced several difficulties. But you'll find out about that in our next video. Did you like this story? So, how about joining us on the Atom mission? Once again, I'll leave the link here for you to click and the QR code for you to scan. If you want to have this unique opportunity on the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, on the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombings, to be present at the place where the first atomic explosion happened. Get up close to the B-29 Enola Gay and take a flight, man. Take a flight on the Boeing B-29. Don't miss it. Come with us on this one. Read this to join the Atom 2025 mission. I'll be waiting for you there now. Tell me, did you already know about the Hiroshima bombing mission in this much detail? Tell us here in the comments. As always, if you like this video, share it with your friends, but also give us a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to the War Room so you don't miss anything else. I'll stop here for now. Thank you again for watching, and here's a big hug from the War Room.